let's talk about the plants and whether they suffer. Because the latest idiocy and lunacy being tossed my way the last couple of years has been, hey man, carrots suffer and die just like cows do, so what's the difference? Okay, in case you were unaware of this difference, you have to have a functioning central nervous system connected to a brain in order to suffer. And this is not up for debate. Which is why people in the hospital who are brain dead, but still alive, but can't feel anything are called vegetables. How about that? A little truth and science for a change. Yeah, we don't call these people fish. We don't call them chickens and turkeys and cows and pigs. We call them vegetables. But even if someone somehow proved that insentient life forms like plants were capable of suffering, we're causing more harm to the planet by harvesting all the plants and feeding all those plants to the animals and killing all the animals to get the nutrients they got from the plants, which were all the nutrients that we needed to begin with. With all the crop land in America alone, America could be feeding 10 billion people. Again, there's only 7.5 billion on the planet, which means less land would be used, less plants would be harvested, less violence committed if we ate plants directly. And if plants really can't suffer, how come firefighters never rescue them? And don't say it's discriminatory, because animals are the most discriminated species on this planet. But there's still a plan in place to save them during a fire. Humans get saved first, but if it's safe to do so, even if it's unsafe to do so, they'll go back inside and save the animals. But even if it were safe to do so again, no firefighter in the history of the world has ever gone back in a third time to save the chrysanthemums. Hey Bob, quick, you save the basil plant from the kitchen, I'll get the rhododendron from the second floor. Do you think that if I gave lectures about cruelty to vegetables, especially root vegetables like yams, called my speech the silence of the yams? Because everybody knows that yams scream for about 30 to 45 seconds after you yank them out of the ground before they die. That I would have been invited into 180 schools to give 2,600 lectures to 60,000 students in 30 different states. And I was just thinking about this the other day, but what do we say about fruits and vegetables when they get old? They're ripe, ready to eat, or rot. And what do we say about animals when they get old? They're old. Because animals are alive in the exact same way that we are. And plants are food. So can we please stop making up idiotic excuses to torture and kill the animals? And make up an excuse to care about them instead? To become vegan, to actually live by the golden rule, instead of just paying lip service to it. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Think about it. How would you feel if the moment you were born, somebody else had already planned the day of your execution?
Now, if I were honestly decrying the horrors of what we put plants through in this world, the very same people who brought up the topic of plants having feelings would say that I was crazy. Let's look at the basic science. Plants do not have a central nervous system. Unlike animals, plants are insentient beings. Have you ever seen a carrot have a startle response? Have you seen tomatoes flee from their captors? How about a banana trying to bite the hand that plucked it? And if plants do have feelings, why are people not up in arms when their neighbors mow the lawn or trim their bushes? For many plants, pruning them or cutting off parts of them actually helps the plant to thrive. But would you start chopping off the appendages of your child or your pet just to see if it invigorates them? Everybody knows the difference between trimming a bush and slicing the throat of a living creature. I've seen even the most staunch dairy, egg, and meat eaters cringe while watching slaughterhouse videos. How many people turn away in horror at the slicing of a melon? Whose stomach turns when a potato is boiled? Now suppose that the argument that plants are sentient beings is accurate, veganism would still cause the least amount of suffering. In America, up to 80% of our crops are fed to our livestock, and globally, up to 65% of all of the world's crops are fed fed to the 60 billion land animals that are slaughtered every year. Vegans actually consume 1/10 of the plant matter consumed either directly or indirectly by meat, dairy, and egg eaters. So even if you are all about protecting the plants of the world, being vegan is still the best way to reduce suffering.
Okay. Plants aren't sentient, okay? There is no reason to believe plants are sentient. As a matter of fact, even people who talk about plant ethics, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but there have been two books recently that have come out, one by Michael Martyr and one by a guy named Dan Kimowitz. And in neither of those books do the authors maintain that plants are sentient, have any kind of mind, or can suffer. Plants cannot suffer. They have no nervous system. They have no benzodiazepine receptors. They are alive, but they react. They do not respond. So, now you say, well, how do we know that, they might? And the answer is, how do I know that my mouse isn't going to get up and walk away? It's not logically impossible, although I don't think it's very likely. So, do I think that plants are sentient? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, there is absolutely no evidence for plant sentience. Not any evidence whatsoever. So to say that the tomato plant wants to live is, in my mind, nonsense. I don't even understand what that means. I understand what I mean when you say my dog wants to live. I understand that. My dog has some sort of mind. It's different from my mind because my dog doesn't use symbolic communication, but my dog prefers or desires or wants to continue to live in the way that she thinks about those issues, however that is, and I'm not sure exactly how it is, but it's clear to me that she does. As a matter of fact, it's impossible to describe or understand her behavior without imputing those sorts of cognitive states to her, or equivalents of those cognitive states to her. Whereas to talk about a plant wanting to live, I don't even know what that means. There is no one there. There is no mind of any sort which prefers or desires or wants. So, does a plant react? And the answer is yes. If I put an electrical impulse through a wire, a bell will go off. But that doesn't mean that, there's any sort of cognition there of any sort whatsoever. So, I just don't, but having said that, let me just sort of get to the bottom line, which is, even if plants are sentient, which I think is nonsense, but even if it were the case, we'd still be obligated to be vegans, because the bottom line is, every time you eat meat, you're eating many times the weight of that meat in terms of plants. So when you sit down and eat your steak, you're eating about 16 pounds of plants. So if you believe that plants are sentient, which I do not, which I think is complete nonsense, but if you believe that, then you're still obligated to be a vegan, because when you eat that steak, you're eating 16 pounds of the plants that you think are sentient.
Animals do suffer and feel pain. Most of us have no problem pulling lettuce from the ground or cutting the limb off of a tree, but most of us are unable or unwilling to stab an animal in the heart or cut a limb off of an animal. All we can do is act on what we know to be true. And what we know to be true is that animals feel pain and fear, and they struggle to escape death when confronted by it. That's the issue here. The assertion that plants may or may not suffer or feel pain doesn't justify causing pain and distress to dogs and cows and cats and elephants and chickens and every other animal we know is capable of suffering just like humans. There's no difference there. We know that non-human animals and human animals do scream when you dismember them, but also by dismissing the distinction between killing plants and killing non-human animals, by that logic, you're also saying there's no difference between killing plants and killing human animals. I think ultimately this whole thing is an attempt to play the gotcha game with vegans in order to accuse them of being hypocritical by trying to poke a hole in the principle by which ethical vegans live, the do no harm principle. Because if you can prove that plants are sentient or conscious, the implication then is that it would be silly to consider the interests of the animals we kill and use and consume, and not the interests of the plants. To that, I would say, as a longtime vegan and someone who empowers others to live according to their own values of compassion, and kindness. I have no illusions about what being vegan means. And what I know for sure is that it's not about trying to attain some kind of level of perfection or purity. I'm not trying to obtain some kind of vegan certification. The world is just too imperfect for that. But even as such, even in this imperfect world, the absurdist argument that we should do nothing because we can't do everything simply leads us to complacency and apathy. Don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do something, anything.